put the sound on as well. So you can now be heard.
Excellent.
Of other shows, and he's written a few really interesting books, kind of getting into the topics that people, or the details of the paranormal topics that people haven't really covered much, like a Trojan Feast. And his other book was The Brimstone Deceit. And then there's a really interesting one as well about Thieves in the Night. That one's getting a little bit scary. We can talk about some of those, but he's also got some upcoming work as well that we want to talk about. And yeah, the topics are wide and various. And thanks for coming on. It's finally good to talk to you, Joshua.
Likewise, guys. It's a pleasure to have a window into the igloo.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is the new igloo kind of. We moved into a new space here, so yeah.
Igloo 2.0, yeah.
Igloo
Space
2.0,
Igloo.
yeah, exactly.
That's what we're calling it.
Yeah, it's going good. So congratulations on your new family and stuff. I know you've been away from podcasting for a while, so we're glad to get you back into the groove here.
Yeah, it's good to be back on the horse. I had to take 3 months old today, so I had to take some time off to make sure I got my life back in order. So
right on.
We'll see. I'm doing a little run here and, of podcasts, and we're going to see how it fits in the schedule, and hopefully I'll be back in the saddle relatively soon with all that.
Well, you've done a lot of interesting work on different aspects of the paranormal and fairy lore and all kinds of stuff. And I just realized, as we were talking before, I didn't know that you and Darren, the way you guys finally connected and scheduled this thing is, I guess Darren sent, what did you do, Darren? You sent a pic of your daughter was interested in fairies, or sent a pic of one or something? And
well, we were out in Golden, out by Golden, staying at a cabin. And I wasn't there for the picture taken, but Lisa and Madison went for a walk. Yeah, we'll discuss here today.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And I've also got, had an experience when we were out doing the CE5 stuff, looking for UFOs. And one of the ladies that's with us is, she's, she said she always captures these orbs and stuff. And some people seem to have that knack at it. And she was taking pictures of fairies and orbs, and thought that's some other stuff, right, coming up?
Yeah, I've got a couple of different irons in the fire. The one, Timothy Renner, who has the podcast Strange Familiars. Tim contacted me. I talked to him on and off on Where Did the Road Go here and there, but he contacted me a while back and said, this book needs to be written, and I would like for you to be the one to write it with. I'm pretty picky about people that I collaborate in terms of how they write and sort of the way that they think. But Tim and I really seem to be a match made in heaven on this. So we're talking about a lot of the stuff that are probably, a lot of it's going to make cryptozoologists of the nuts and bolts, flesh and blood variety pretty furious. We're talking about, the disappearing stuff, the cloaking stuff, the disappearing the disappearing trackways, pointing out a lot of these inconsistencies, and also looking at a lot of this stuff through folklore. No one's ever really done a comparison of, modern Bigfoot lore and fairies. But you can also draw parallels between, Bigfoot reports and old reports of witches, and UFOs. And there's actually a link that Tim found that I when he first told me, I'm like, there's nothing there, dude. That's one or two cases. There's nothing there. But he actually found a connection between these apparitions of women in white associated with Bigfoot reports, which is something that I just didn't think. I thought it was going to be a pretty dry well that he was digging there. But as it turns out, it's just, this entire project's really like drinking through a hose. You just pick at it a little bit and you just get this gush of information. Yeah. So I was looking at my chapters, and I'm like, Tim, my chapters alone are about as long as one of my books. So we're going to split it. Yes. But there's just so much to talk about. There's so much strangeness associated with Bigfoot. I'm more sympathetic nowadays than Tim is to the idea that Bigfoot is a flesh and blood creature. And look, I want it to be, right? Because that way we'll actually get some answers someday. But there's just a lot of strange stuff out there, and people have mentioned it here and there, but by and large, the conversation's been dominated by people who are really invested in the idea that this is some sort of undiscovered relic primate or something along those lines.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I always come back to, is the high strangest part of it, because, Darren and I joke around here. I've got my shirt on here, Save Sasquatch. I'm not the one that's going to shoot the guy. Darren's the one that's going to take the shot. I don't think, we should be shooting, and I don't think you can shoot him because he's going to disappear or something. There's enough high strangeness out there that's what I always come back to, is there's so many accounts of it that I'm glad you're putting all that together, because I think it's a part that doesn't necessarily disprove or prove anything, maybe, but it's that to me is not important. There's so much evidence that it just has to. You can't just hide that in a little bucket and say it doesn't exist. And the same goes with high strangeness and other things too. I mean, people want to just ignore that section of it, and you can't.
Absolutely. I mean, so I'm not implying that there's some sort of vast cryptozoological conspiracy, because a lot of those guys have really laid their lives at the altar of cryptozoology and Bigfoot and whatnot. But even some of these landmark cases that people talk about, they sort of willingly omit a lot of strange details. Are either of y'all familiar with the Ape Canyon case?
No, I don't think so.
So the Ape Canyon case is often talked about in sort of, when cryptozoologists tend to talk about it, they tend to focus on the culmination of that event, which was in a location that has since become known as Ape Canyon, up in the Pacific Northwest. There were some miners who took a pot shot at Bigfoot, and later that night, their cabin was under siege by several hairy creatures that were throwing rocks at them, and it sounds like a very sort of flesh and blood ape attack. But if you actually read the writings of one of the primary witnesses, Fred Beck, who actually owned the mining claim, a lot of weird stuff unfolds. For example, Fred Beck, to his dying day, was convinced that it was some sort of spiritual, psychic, poltergeisty kind of phenomena, and the things leading up to the Ape Canyon attack just don't get talked about. Not that they're necessarily hidden or anything, but people just don't talk about it when they talk about the Ape Canyon attack. So Fred Beck was looking for a mining claim, and he was told by a spiritual being that he would find a white arrow that was supposed to guide him to it. So him and his miners saw this white arrow in the sky guiding them to this mining claim. Once they were there, they actually heard sounds of machinery underground, which has some echoes of the Skinwalker Ranch stuff. And perhaps most telling, there were two footprints, one or two, can't remember which, but there was a series of isolated footprints, either one or two, on a sandbar that was like an acre wide. And one of the guys in the mining group actually said, it looks like something was dropped from the air and then picked back up again.
Yeah.
And people just don't talk about this. When people do, I think of a quote from Rene Dahinden, who was, one of the biggest flesh and blood cryptozoologists. And he said, I think Fred went, sort of crazy in his old age, which is an attitude that really, really, gets on my nerves. When you're investing so much as, a ufologist or a cryptozoologist, when you're investing so much in the power of the witness's narrative, I don't think it's up to you to cherry pick what they said they saw and didn't see.
Yeah, exactly.
That seems dishonest to me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So what do you, when you said they took pot shots, did that happen? Like, did the arrow lead them to anything? And did they took shots? The
arrow led them to the mining claim, actually, where they actually began mining themselves. And once they got there, they named it after another spiritual being, which Fred Beck never describes, but they named the mining claim after this spiritual being that Fred Beck saw, and her name was Vander White. So there's another sort of lady in white connection, even though it doesn't describe that she was wearing white. Her name is, Vander White.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's just a bunch of little threads like that to pull on, and that's how a book just metastasizes into 2 volumes like it has.
Yeah, and they took a shot. So what are the instances where people try to shoot it in it? I mean, I've heard stories of they look at the thing's face before they shoot it, and they realize it's sort of human, or they get a look into its eyes and they kind of can't pull the trigger, or they've tried to pull the trigger and it's hit them and it hasn't done any damage, or the thing disappears. Like, are those? Yeah, those are all things.
And there's so many variations and variants on that. They fire a shotgun at point blank range and it disappears in a flash of light, or they fire high caliber bullets at it and it doesn't even seem to flinch. And people will rightly point out that a revolver will not, a small caliber revolver will not stop a grizzly bear, but the grizzly bear, if you hit it, it's going to react in some form or fashion.
Yeah. And
if you're actually unloading on it, I found a story of some guys who claim to have unloaded with an automatic assault rifle, and the thing just didn't do anything.
Wow.
And of course, some of these, that's sort of probably a point of contention. Some of the stories that are in this book are not always from unimpeachable sources, but when you look at the way that the cryptozoological community at large reacts to these stories of this type, it really is no surprise to me that you sort of have to go to places that, you have to go into some areas of where people are being anonymous, or they're just, putting sending their answers into a website, which is something that in my previous work I've tried to avoid at all costs. A couple have to slip in here and there, but I tend to not use as much, stories from websites, because the controls there are just not quite up to snuff. But if you've got a community that actively, either ignores or worse, makes fun of, ridicules these stories, and it's no surprise to me that you kind of have to go to some sites, and it's not like we're going on a creepypasta or an online message board or anything for these stories. There's some reputable websites that we use that have had stories sent in, but you sort of do have to go to more of those listener stories, and than you would for my other work, which tends to focus on this was in this publication or this book or this other things like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, can they be flesh and blood and something else? I mean, it seems like that's what's really happening. I mean, they're leaving physical traces, and yet, the flesh and blood people are expecting something more prosaic, a skunk ape kind of thing, or some sort of, like you were saying before, but it seems like there's a bit of both going on there.
Well, I'm of two minds about this. I really... My first reaction is to think about, the Mike Clellan model. And I just had the wonderful chance to spend a weekend with Mike at this conference that I was just at this past weekend. And he's a lovely, him and his girlfriend are absolutely lovely people. And, Mike doesn't think that every owl has to do with UFOs. There are some owls that are just owls, that are just birds, but at the same time, his research has really sort of uncovered the fact that there are sometimes instances where these owls are, in his words, messengers for whatever this other is that lies behind the UFO phenomena, or even behind spiritual phenomena as well. So the idea that, at least I don't think Mike says as much, but the idea that I perceive is that this other intelligence sort of co-opts the imagery of the owl to convey a message, or to actually, wear as a mask. I really like the idea that there is, because as you said, there's plenty of physical evidence. In fact, I would say that all other, anomalous disciplines have Bigfoot envy in terms of the amount of physical evidence that they have. So I'm fond of the idea that there is a relic hominid out there that sometimes whatever this other intelligence is appropriates, because you find similar stories about screen memories of deer and UFO encounters and raccoons and other things. But at the same time, even if Bigfoot has, is purely metaphysical, I mean, non-physical phenomena can leave physical impacts on our environment. I mean, psi phenomena is a great example of that. The fact that your consciousness can leave or can actually act in the physical world, even though it's intangible and non-physical, suggests that we don't necessarily need to have this sort of dichotomy of it's either flesh and blood because it leaves physical evidence, or it's not. I mean, again, ghost phenomena is the same way. I mean, one of the primary means of discerning whether or not a building was haunted at one point was to spread talcum powder on the floor and wait for footsteps to manifest. So I think there is I'm convinced at this point there is a metaphysical component to what some people are describing as Bigfoot. How deep that rabbit hole goes, I'm not entirely sure, but I try to be non-dogmatic about things, because as soon as you are, something comes along and knocks your feet out from underneath you.
Can you buy silver bullets? If it's metaphysical, do you need a silver bullet to shoot a Bigfoot?
I think that's more for vampires and lycanthropes. I don't think that.
But it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there are some interesting connections between Bigfoot and I won't say Dogman reports. I mean, some people will say that there is as well, but there's some interesting connections between Bigfoot and a lot of werewolf lore as well. I mean, you have stories of Bigfoot. This is something not a lot of people talk about, but you have stories of Bigfoot wearing clothing. You have stories of Bigfoot wearing a flannel shirt, or, I mean, one thing that really crops up often is Bigfoot wearing a belt. And one of the means by which witches would transform men into werewolves was by giving them a garter, which, you know, is basically a belt.
Wow.
So yeah, just little things like that you look at and you say, I don't know what's going on here. You know, I'm kind of where I am right now. I'm thinking that it has something to do with archetypes and you know, metaphors, or, you know, not metaphors, but archetypes sort of coming to life in a way. Because a lot of the European wild man lore maps directly onto the Bigfoot thing as well. So we're excited about it. It's a huge project, and I'm trying to, you know, in between feeding babies, I'm trying to squeeze out some edits to some of these chapters because I've just done a first pass on all of it.
Nice.
But we're shooting for, I think, autumn of this year. That's when we hope to have, I guess, volume 1 out. I can't see us releasing them both at the same time, but maybe we will. I don't know.
Right.
It's still not 100% that it's going to be two volumes, but I feel pretty confident that it's going to have to be split.
Do you have a name yet?
And I'm sorry?
Do you have a name yet, or
yeah, where the footprints end.
where the footprints end?
And I'm relatively certain that we have an individual lined up who will be writing the foreword, provided he likes it. And it's an individual whom you've had on the show, and I think when you see who that person is, it'll sort of give you an idea of the sort of Bigfoot book that we've written. You know, it's not a cryptozoologist. Think more chaos magician.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Gordon White.
That's so funny.
I didn't say that. Maybe.
It's funny because I just listed it. I keep in my head. I'm hearing your Gordon White interview, and it's just sprouting a lot of ideas and thoughts.
You know, Gordon and I have had this long-standing joke that no one outside of America likes Bigfoot, and so I've had this joke that he would write the foreword, and you know, at one point he's like, "But you know that I would, right?" I was like, "Oh, well, shit, maybe we should." So pending, you know, him having time because he's a very busy guy, and pending him, you know, not finding anything in it that he objects to or finding it, you know, of quality. That's the current plan, is to have Gordon write it.
Nice, that's fantastic.
But you know, until it's done, it's, you know, it's all fluid.
Yeah. What I was just thinking about it because we always call them Sasquatch up here and well, I don't want to assume genders, right? They could be females or males. So but do you guys call them Bigfoot down there? Is that a U.S. thing, or is Sasquatch a West Coast thing, or does it even matter? Like,
it's pretty much an American thing. I mean, that term cropped up during the you know, sort of the Ray Wallace the Ray Wallace incident in the 1970s. I'm trying to remember the exact date here. That was sort of the first print mention of Bigfoot. Sorry, not the 70s. Geez, the 50s. I'm sorry. I've got baby brain. But yeah, actually, I have tended not to like the term Bigfoot. I've always tended to prefer the term Sasquatch, but I use them interchangeably, and they show up interchangeably in the book. You know, a lot of people tend to think that Sasquatch was a Native American name, and it's not. It's really an Anglicanization of a bunch of different Native American names that they sort of mash together. And, you know, some of the closest stuff that you find in Indigenous lore is like Seskak is sort of the thing that you'll find, and then yeah.
Huh.
What's your favorite name?
My favorite Bigfoot name? I think one of my favorite. So a lot of cultures have sort of Bigfoot, Sasquatch analogs. You know, sort of different
like Yeti
names.
And all that.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, so like I'm thinking of Skookum and you know, Bukwas and Kushtaka. I really like Dusinoqua, which is a Tlingit word from Alaska, because she's a little bit more of a witch character. You find a lot of parallels between her and, like, you know, Baba Yaga from Siberia and from, you know, Russia, because she picks up children and drops them into a basket.
Wow.
But she's covered in hair, and she, you know, I think memory serves. I don't have the notes for this in front of me, but she, you know, has a a skull from which she drinks and gains eternal life, and it's it's really weird stuff. And that's the thing. I mean, there's plenty of indigenous lore that talks about these creatures as being flesh and blood, and there's plenty of lore that talks about them being spirit beings, and plenty of lore that talks about them being somewhere in between. My problem is that cryptozoology has historically basically just said, when they're being told, that's a deer by indigenous people, they're like, that's a deer and we kill it and we eat it. And that's a rabbit and we kill it and we eat it. And that's a fish and you can kill it and eat it. But that's a Sasquatch, and it's this mysterious, supernatural being, and they just don't listen to them. They just, they assume that they know. They assume that they know the environment in which these people lived better than those people did, and it's a little bit problematic for me. Not that I'm the sort of person to really flock to those sort of attitudes, but it's a little bit problematic to me, and I think that especially with the way that materialism as a paradigm seems to be on the ropes.
I was just
now is not the time. Now is not the time to double down on this interpretation.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I mean, it seems like to me that might be changing a little bit as, cryptozoology might change a little bit along with that. Materialism is like basically, like you talk a lot about on some of your other shows, the psi researchers is really what gets you, what you'll hang your hat on, and that's really showing. And we know we've had a couple. I mean, we had this. This Mark Gober on and then upside down thinking. I mean, there's people that are coming out now that are they're old materialists or they're old, atheists, and they're coming out and saying like, okay, the things aren't what we've been told all along, and there's lots of evidence to show it once you start looking.
Yeah, it's I mean, I've often said that cryptozoology is going to be the last of these sort of Fortean unexplained disciplines to get on the consciousness bandwagon, but it's interesting. You get people to the bar at the conference, and they all start to admit some things, But the public face says, "Oh no, this is we're going to catalog this, and we're going to give it a scientific name, and this and that, and the other," which I admire. But it's been how many years have you been doing this, and you don't have a body? Maybe it's time to try a different tactic,
like shooting it.
Hey, I'm pro. If Bigfoot is flesh and blood, I'm pro kill. I'm sorry.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, yeah, bro. I could hear Graham's heart break from here.
I know, man. I just, but I mean, that's the price of admission if you want it cataloged. I mean, I think that's, or maybe pro capture. But as I think you guys have talked about on the show before, like the idea that you can just stick a multi-purpose tranquilizer dart into a gun and shoot something and it won't, either piss it off or kill it is that's a movie. That's a Hollywood fantasy. You actually have to have a good idea of the creature's metabolism and its weight and all that sort of thing.
And you have to have it. I mean, you already got a couple million hunters wandering around with shotguns.
Yep.
For every trank gun, there's 1,000 rifles.
Okay, so let me amend that. Maybe I'm not pro kill. But I am pro body. So, I mean, of course, the best scenario would be to find something that's already been killed, or for there to be an accident of some sort. An accident.
Yeah, exactly.
To get a hitman to go kill Bigfoot.
Were you hoping
it was an accident?
So you wish Harry would have died in Harry and the Hendersons?
No, come on, I'm not that heartless.
But that scenario, like you'd prefer that I'm driving my truck down the road and I accidentally run down a Bigfoot than if you then have to actually someone shoot it? Because that's a tougher one. It's way more likely to be a guy in a suit. If things are moving fast, you're in your truck, it's a Bigfoot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's it's probably.
He's just like, fuck, Frank, why?
You hear these stories about Bigfoot or people dressed up as Bigfoot wandering out, and it's amazing that more people haven't been killed or been accidentally killed. I actually had a family friend whose son was really into Bigfoot, and he had his dad had like gutted a deer, and like the day before during hunting season. So he took like all the viscera and like dropped it by the side of the road and would wait in his Bigfoot costume for cars to come along and would walk across the road. And his dad just laid into him after he found that out. He's like, yeah, you could have been killed in a lot of ways. Somebody could have shot you or hit you.
Or
yeah.
You track some wolves with your deer carcass, and then you get eaten. Bigfoot's getting chased by a pack of wolves down the road.
Less of a problem in North Carolina, but coyotes definitely for sure.
No wolves down there?
They have red wolves in the eastern part of the state, and it's a poorly kept secret that pumas have made a really strong comeback. I mean, every there are plenty of sightings, and on top of that, I think a couple of years ago there was someone who hit one in the dead of winter with their car and killed it.
Wow.
That's in the western part of the state. Yeah, these things are here. That's a conspiracy I can definitely get behind. Is the idea that the DNR is just not wanting to acknowledge the fact that this species has bounced back as strongly as it has. Okay, so it's probably western, mountain lion as opposed to eastern, but still, they don't want to really acknowledge that because it's just one more thing for them to have to deal with. I think.
Yeah.
Just in terms of resources and management and whatnot. I mean, so here's the ironic thing. I mean, there was. Oh, this is probably about 10 years ago or so. Even though supposedly there's no, thriving mountain lion population east of the Mississippi, there was an actual warning put out at Mammoth Cave State Park in Kentucky that was warning people about, people have seen a mountain lion, so tread lightly. So no mountain lions in east of the Mississippi, but we're still going to warn you about them anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So do you want to get into the fairy stuff now, Darren, or do you want to...
I did send the picture.
Okay.
To Joshua. I sent it just in the Skype chat because all the internet is the internet is not cooperating tonight.
Yeah, I lost your video, so I assume that everything's good on your end, and we're just going to keep on forging ahead.
We're just going to keep on forging ahead.
The audio is pretty good.
We've done the YouTube screen to just a picture because the video stream to just a picture because the internet is not cooperating. Anyway, I did send you the picture, and it is the picture that's on the YouTube right now.
Yes.
So what do you think we've got here?
So, I've been thinking about this a lot because, y'all sent me some other pictures that I actually, there are a couple of those that I really like.
We'll go through them one by one here today.
Okay. So the first one that you sent me, the one that sort of started this entire conversation, I like it. I haven't been able to get too close, but, I think the fact that it's this really odd blue anomaly, is really especially interesting. If you look at sort of the colors that are described of fairy lights, that's a very common color that you see. I am generally pretty skeptical of orb and fairy photos. But having said that, if you think that every orb or fairy photo is showing you an orb or a fairy, you're wrong. And if you think that every orb or fairy photo is not showing an orb or fairy, you're also wrong.
Exactly. That's exactly.
So, there's some middle ground in there that I think you have to be, discerning enough to pick out. If somebody shows me something that looks a little bit nondescript or looks a little bit amorphous, I guess, I'm much more likely to latch on to that than an image of something that looks like, a person with wings for a couple of different reasons. The primary reason, although, well, we can talk about why this is sort of a flawed idea, but the primary reason is because if you look at sort of the evolution of that fairy image, the addition of wings is an 18th century children's storybook edition.
Ah.
It has zero widespread precedent in actual fairy lore. Having said that, fairies could levitate, but there was never actually this idea that they were these people with like bug wings. That's not something you really see. At the same time, I do think that these phenomena tend to utilize and latch on to pop culture impressions of things. I think the fact that whatever's behind the UFO phenomena seems to keep on recontextualizing itself and changing its face and changing the sort of craft it uses. I think that speaks to the fact that we play a role in creating these things. But so that's the first reason that I sort of shy away from those. The second reason is that a lot of those pictures of what looks like a person with wings, I have yet to see one that I don't see and can't unambiguously say it's not a bug illuminated by a flash or something. Ready to be proven wrong.
That's kind of what
my threshold. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, we just lost you for a sec there, but that's actually what I was when I emailed you all the orbs and the pictures from our CE5 there. That's kind of what my thought was on the fairy looking one with the wings. Is that just the flash catching that bug?
Right.
But instead, there's a bunch of bugs in the air, but somehow it's caught that one bug more than the others.
I really like. I think it's either the second. No, it's not the second photo. I think it's probably it's probably the second photo because then you zoom in on it. It's on the second page. I really like that one a lot because it reminds me of the original image that started this conversation, and it's the same hue of blue, but in that image, it's almost like these little small robed figures in a tree. You know which photo I'm referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's by far my favorite because not only does it look like these small robed figures, but it kind of looks like they have heads on top. I'm not ruling out that that's not some sort of image artifact or something, but it's that really interests me. And of course, with a lot of the orb photos, if it's just one orb, that's interesting to me. If it's like 12 orbs, it's like, well, maybe that was some dust or some sort of particulate. Like the orb photos, I'm kind of always, even in ghost hunting and stuff too, I'm kind of like agnostic on. Not that I don't think that orb phenomena isn't real and that you can't go to places and see anomalous light phenomena. I mean, I saw a little bit of that with Tim Renner this past week when I was at one of his research sites. So, but photographic evidence is just a difficult thing to sit with, especially this day and age.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, some of the orbs.
Those other ones do sort of look like the same blue, though, don't they?
They do. It's almost I would not be surprised if it's the same color value. And then some of these green orbs that you sent in the CE5 stuff are interesting too because that's just not. Those don't look like the way that particulates tend to illuminate, to my eye at least. And you can't write out the fact. You can't dismiss rather the fact that you guys were. At that event, the point was to have something strange happen. I mean, these photographs don't exist in a continuum. Don't exist in a vacuum. Rather, they exist in a continuum of what was happening at the time and different circumstances that may make it seem a little bit more strange than it does just someone who's just coming in cold and just wants to have this knee-jerk reaction of writing them off. So but I mean there's some definitely some interesting stuff in that stuff that you sent me, but that one with those almost look like figures in the tree really is interesting to me. There's one photo that I really love, not one that you sent over. But there is a photo out there of a Cornish pixie face that's a really weird image. I'll have to see if I can't find it and drop it your way.
Yeah, and I mean the one thing